I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and here today with me is Andy Schectman, president of Miles Franklin. Thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you here again.
Super nice to be back again. Thanks for having me.
Really good to be catching up. And our last interview, so this was back in the summer, it was just a few weeks ahead of the BRICS annual meeting. And it was a really interesting conversation. People should go back and watch that if they didn't catch it. But you told us even if we didn't get the BRICS currency announcement at that meeting, like many people expected, it was still going to be the beginning of a big change in the world. And I think what you emphasized at the time was the sheer number of countries that were lining up to join the BRICS, not necessarily publicly, but behind the scenes as well. And so I took away lots going on there. And what stuck with me as well is your comments on logarithmic decay. So slowly, then all at once. And what I want to start with is, and this is a big topic, but what chipping away have we seen there since that last conversation?
Yeah, I didn't believe that they would issue a common settlement currency at the last meeting. I think ultimately they will. The finance minister from Russia has told us that. At the end of that meeting, they came back and said, we're going to trade in local currencies. We're going to task the finance ministers with going back to the drawing board, coming back to the meeting, which is actually in October of this year, coming up. There's going to be 200 meetings, by the way, in Russia over the course of the next 10 months. And I think this is something that is a foregone conclusion, but much like they talk about in cryptocurrencies, mass adoption before it becomes accepted, I think the same thing is true here, where you have to have mass adoption in the number of countries that would join on to make it legitimate. In the scope of GDP, in the scope of military might, in the scope of natural resources, in the scope of trade routes globally, all of these things are factored into the decision. So at the meeting, we found out that 6 entries would be admitted in, and so far, because of Milei of Argentina, he decided to stay out. 5 have been formally accepted. That would be Iran, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And when you look at where these countries are in terms of their relationship to trade routes, the Red Sea, the Straits of Hormuz, etc., when you look at the amount of natural resources they possess or the size of their economic growth, like Ethiopia is the fastest growing country in Africa, Egypt is close to the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, and then, of course, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, you don't have to say much about them. In fact, I do want to talk about the UAE after this. I think it's really important. But the chipping away would be, we have subsequently found out that 30 countries have formally applied. Little by little mass adoption. And if you look at the countries that have formally applied, you can Google it and find it. Every single one of them are rich in natural resources, from rare earth metals to oil and gas to liquid natural gas, all of the things that you would need to build a war chest of legitimacy, we find in these growing union of countries. And so aside from that, we've seen things such as Saudi Arabia not only join the BRICS, but also join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. We've seen them tell the folks in Davos a year ago would be open to taking other currencies for oil. All of these things are chipping away little by little because it is the pricing of oil in dollars through Saudi Arabia and OPEC that gives us the hegemony. So when you take a step back and realize that every single OPEC country is on the Belt Road Initiative, when you realize that in the scope of 1 year, a country like Iran has joined the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and fully been admitted into BRICS, sidestepping sanctions. When you take a look at 30 countries applying, when you take a look at the promise of a gold or commodity-backed currency, one of the other things that I probably said to you at that meeting, would be my guess, or our last interview, was that I would anticipate the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union joining BRICS. And shortly after that meeting, just a few months ago, the president of Belarus has called for a summit to do just that. These are all the same countries. And so when you talk about mass adoption and chipping away at the dollar hegemony, you put all these countries together, you have the majority of human population, you have a much bigger percentage of global GDP, you have 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, you have all of the trade routes, the strategic trade routes in the southern hemisphere covered, including the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and now the North-South Passage, which is an easier way to go, arguably, than going around the Cape of Good Hope or even using the Straits of Hormuz. You have options that won't be patrolled by the United States Navy. Little by little, by little, by little, by little, you're chipping away at the dollar hegemony. The rallying cry that's pulling all this together is the weaponization of the dollar. And I would also argue the fact that we signed an executive order to go green. Biden signed, by 2050, we're going to be green 85%. By 2030, 50%. So we have, in essence, told the Saudi kingdom and OPEC, who gives us the dollar hegemony by pricing oil in dollars, that we're going to go green pretty soon. And if you're on the wrong side of us, we're going to sanction your funds, let alone the fact that the Speaker of the House and the Biden administration and the whole Senate is talking about confiscating the assets we sanctioned from Russia instead of just sanctioning them and giving them back like we did to Iran. No, we're talking about actually keeping them and using them to fund the war in the Ukraine because Congress won't appropriate the funds. So you cross a whole different line when you do that as the world reserve currency. Little by little, suppression, coercion, sanctioning, confiscation, all of these things, instead of cooperation, is the rallying cry. And the glue that will make it stick will be the fact that gold, I believe, 100% will be pegged to a new reserve currency using blockchain technology or a new settlement currency. Now, two reasons I say that. One, we were told by the Russian finance minister 2 years ago that it will be a basket of commodities, especially gold. Two, what did the Bank of International Settlements do in 2019? They reclassified gold as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset. And if you look at the amount of gold that these countries have bought, 2 years running, it's a world record. Most gold ever bought, ever, by the central banks over the last 2 years, most of them those countries. And if you just take a step back and look at what's happening, that's just there. We could talk about what's happening here, but we should definitely talk about what United Arab Emirates did, because they took one big axe swing to the tree of chipping away of the dollar hegemony. And as I mentioned to you, I said it's one thing for me to say all the OPEC countries are on the Belt Road, that Saudi Arabia applied and was accepted to BRICS, that they joined the New Development Bank, that they joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and that they told people in Davos a year ago that, yeah, we're open to taking other currencies for oil. By the way, 20% of all oil sales in 2023 settled outside the dollar, growing little by little by little. But the United Arab Emirates, the seventh largest producer of oil in the world, an OPEC country, just joining BRICS alongside of Saudi Arabia, came out 3 days before the United Nations meeting just a few weeks ago in Dubai on climate change. 200 countries from around the world attended, delegates from 200 countries, 3 days before they get there, and it was only picked up by MSN. One news source, a very small article, UAE, we will no longer take dollars for oil. So you have the seventh largest producer of oil in the world, an OPEC member, and a BRICS member, who 3 days before 200 countries appear in their country to talk about climate change, which was ironically presided over by the chairman of the state-owned oil company of the United Arab Emirates, who told at one point the ex-president of Ireland, if we go back and to green, if we go to green and move away from fossil fuels, you're going to send civilization into the caves. I'm just saying. He was making his point right there. And so that's very provocative in and of itself to say that when the whole majority of the world's countries are there to talk about climate change. And then right after all these countries leave, the delegates leave, Putin, who hasn't left Russia but twice in the last 2 years because of the bounty on his head, flies flanked by 4 Russian MiG jets to the United Arab Emirates. What was that discussion about? Do you think it was we've got your back, the way that, no one had that discussion with Gaddafi or Hussein when they made similar statements that we're going to take other items, whether it be gold or euro for oil? No, that didn't fly before, and it was interesting that he makes an impromptu, unannounced trip to visit. The day after that, he goes directly to Saudi Arabia, where OPEC announces a 2 million barrel reduction per day, up from 1 million the day before. The point I'm getting at is that all of these things, little by little by little by little by little by little, are chipping away at the dollar hegemony. And that was a big swing. Certainly not as big as OPEC saying it, but when you realize we're going green, and you realize we've weaponized the dollar, when you realize we've inflated the currency, the bond market's been a disaster, and that doesn't even speak to anything that's going on in the United States. Well, Charlotte, to me, is the biggest thing of all, because if our country was revered the way it once was, the judicial system, the lawlessness now, the questioning of the elections, the open borders, the divisiveness between red and blue and black and white and rich and poor. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I don't think the United States is revered and looked at the way it once was. It all centers around trust. And the trust has been broken or severed across the globe. And I think the trustworthiness of the administration and of the laws and of the system that once was the beacon of light in the world, it's looked at cross-eyed right now. So I know that was a really long answer, and I'm sorry for it, but to get to the point of what do I mean by chipping away, it's everywhere, little by little by little. And the funny thing is, the Western media doesn't tell us any of this. So the majority of people who sense this craziness in the States have no idea what's going on outside the border, and they cannot get out of the way. They will be blindsided when this happens. They cannot get out of the way of something they don't see coming.
Oh, yeah. Never apologize for the lengthy answers. I think it's such valuable information. And this does fit in perfectly, I think, with what I wanted to ask you. So you can see this happening, but as you mentioned, Western media is not reporting on this. I wonder, though, people in power in the U.S., are they seeing this happen? And what do you think they're thinking when they see this chipping away, if indeed they are seeing it as you're seeing it?
Glad you asked that question. And this is where what I try to do is look at all the facts, put them together, and guess. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's Occam's razor, the most logical. All right, so there's a man named Jared Bernstein. He's the lead economic advisor to the United States government. Look him up. He has a degree in music and a master's degree in social work, and he's the lead economic advisor to the United States government. He advocates for the immediate loss of the world reserve status. He wrote a report called Dethrone King Dollar that was picked up by the New York Times, and when Trump slapped tariffs on China when he was president, he said, great, maybe this will break the dollar reserve status. This is a man who is advocating for the loss of the reserve status. Now think about that, take a step back and say, if I want to lose the reserve status, what two things could I do more to piss off the world than to weaponize the dollar and then tell the linchpin of the hegemony, OPEC, hey, thanks, we're going green. So now you have, and then at the same time, inflate your currency. And part of the petrodollar status was taking the excess that you get from selling your oil in dollars and reinvesting it into treasuries. Well, how's that worked over the last couple of years as the treasury market has been obliterated? And then you look at what's happening here. It's all divided and divisive and screwed up, right? And the open cities and the lawlessness and the open borders, all this stuff, they're looking at what the hell is going on in the United States. Now, what I'm getting at is this too stupid to be stupid, or could this be planned? Why would they do it? But why would they do it is the question. Everyone's going to be thinking, why would they do it? And by the way, before I answer that, the number 2 economic advisor of the United States government is a lady named Lael Brainerd, who worked at the Treasury, then worked at the Fed. While at the Fed, working with MIT in development of the new central bank digital currency that Biden fast-tracked in an executive order, and just ran point for FedNow that just came out a few months ago, which is like Venmo and Zelle on steroids backed by the Fed, which will probably be offered in the place of checks and wires within a year. Point I'm getting at is they're both modern monetary theorists. One wants to see a culling of the banks. One wants to lose their reserve status. And so when you look at all the things that we have done, and you look at the banks that are on razor's edge, they jack up interest rates so fast after incentivizing these banks to load up on treasuries when the reserve requirement was 0 at COVID. The banks are on razor's edge. Well, what's the best way to blow up the banks? Let rates go to the moon. How do you incentivize that to happen without falling on the sword? What I'm basically getting at is this. My mentor was a man named Richard Russell. God rest his soul. The best newsletter writer, the smartest man. And he said back then, almost 20 years ago, the Fed has created so much debt it can never be repaid. There are 2 options, either inflate or default. And I think there's option number 3. And option number 3 is to find a villain. It's those bastards, Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC, they did it to us. How could they do it to us? But look at what we've done to shed, and instead of clinging to the prestige and the value and the exorbitant privilege of being the world reserve currency, we are doing everything we can to lose it. Weaponizing the dollar, going green, and letting everyone around the world, and even in the United States, say, what the hell is happening to this country? And it doesn't inspire the confidence that it once did. And, we have $155 trillion in debt by the government's own admission, of which the largest asset in this country, the United States, of $5 trillion is student debt. And $1.6 trillion, 40% of the government's assets are student debt. We are broke, we are insolvent. And so if you want to reset the system, as Klaus Schwab said, we don't want to default, you don't want to hyperinflate. How about incentivize the world to dump dollars as the petrodollar? And every single country in the world has had to stockpile dollars, Charlotte, for the last 50 years. By the way, it's 50 years. You know that the Crown Prince just came out and said China is our most important partner today and for the next 50 years in trading oil. Now, do you think that number and when he said it is significant? I do. But the point of it is, if everyone dumps dollars because we're going green, and if you're on the wrong side of the U.S., think China, Taiwan, think Saudi Arabia, think all the BRICS countries, you're going to get sanctioned. And maybe not even just sanctioned. Maybe you're going to get confiscated like they're doing to Russia. If everyone dumps dollars at some point, little by little by little by little by little, we're building up to that moment. What happens if OPEC says, just like UAE said, just like Russia said, just like Iran said, no more dollars for oil. Thanks for the memories, guys. We appreciate the 50 years of help and protection. And it's worked out great, but you're going a different direction. So we're uniting with the Belt Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and all of BRICS, which is 85% of human population that's not going green. Bang! Every single country on the planet dumps dollars, which creates hyperinflation. The byproduct of hyperinflation are interest rates that have to compensate. You can't have 20% inflation and 5% interest rates. Your currency dies. So as interest rates spike well above the level that Powell wants to do, you reset the entire system because the banks are on edge. You should send rates up there. Every bank is gone. They're over leveraged and undercapitalized. The dollar gets dumped, so the dollar collapses. And as rates spike like that, the bond market and the stock market reset. So stocks, bonds, real estate, the banks, and the dollar all simultaneously collapse. And guess what? You have a villain, but have no fear because Lael Brainerd is here. And she's a modern monetary theorist with a central bank digital currency that she wants to issue to the handful of banks that are alive because the rest of them have died. And I know, Charlotte, you've lost everything. You lost your 401k, you lost your bank account, you've lost everything. Just sign on the dotted line and we'll make you whole with our modern monetary theory central bank digital currency. We reset, we create nationalism instead of globalism. And you have a rallying cry that the United States people who are uneducated and or at least even if they're well-read, they're reading the wrong stuff, will get behind because I'll tell you what, there's not a person downstairs at this conference that would willingly take the CBDC unless they were forced to by some event without a gun to your head. It's either that or starve. What are you going to do? And so what I try to do is put all of these things together. Either this is a path or something similar we're heading down, or it's just too stupid to be stupid. I don't understand how our politicians could make the moves that they are making, incentivize the world to do this, to stabilize the country inside and out, the banks, everything, and put us in this position without understanding. They may be nefarious, but they're not stupid.
I could listen to you talk about this for hours, and you've really added, I think, a number of interesting points since that previous conversation. I'm so interested to hear in the green angle. But where I want to go next is, so you always tell us, I think there's a lot of people at this conference and in the world who are sitting here wondering, okay, so what do I do? And you've told us consistently, watch what the big players are doing. So central banks, they're buying gold. Maybe you should consider buying gold, right? I wonder if there are any other things people should be watching, seeing these large entities doing, and they should also consider doing that.
Well, I mean, I think it's commodities. You know, Zoltan Pozsar, one of the smartest men in the world, he used to run the back room basically for the New York Fed. He understands the plumbing of the system better than anyone. I think he works for UBS right now, but he writes a lot about the environment we find ourselves in, and he calls it Bretton Woods 3. Bretton Woods 1 was when the dollar took over for the pound sterling after World War II. Bretton Woods 2 loosely would be when we defaulted on that. We closed the gold window, and then 3 years later, 50 years ago, struck an arrangement with the Saudi kingdom. Hey, we will protect you. That was the petrodollar. And he's saying Bretton Woods 3 is a system now that will be denoted or described through transparency like blockchain technology and commodities like gold. So that's why I think, what is gold? The only other tier 1 asset. So how do you inspire confidence? People say, who's going to trust China and Russia? Well, who the hell trusts the United States anymore? So instead, you create a system that is trustless. You have a blockchain that the whole world can see, and you peg a commodity to it. Now, it doesn't have to be one-to-one because, you see, the gold, people get hung up on the backing of gold for two reasons. One, de Gaulle from France proved that convertible currencies convert, and he tried to take all the gold away from us. That's why he closed the gold window. Because if you're not going to be true to the system, we'll call it on you and say, give us the gold. And he drained almost half the gold from the Treasury, and so that's why Nixon closed the gold window. And they also say there's no way that the Fed would allow a one-to-one pegging because they wouldn't have the monetary ability to do things, expand the money supply or whatever. So how do you fix that? One, blockchain technology takes the place of convertible. In other words, the immutability is there for everyone to see and audited by the independent auditors that will come in and say, yeah, it's there. Each country has this amount there. It's there. And the way to do it is to peg maybe 5 or 10% of each currency unit. So only 5 or 10% is pegged. That gives you 90 or 95% monetary latitude. They can do what they need to do, but still be tethered to the fact that instead of being able to copiously create money out of nowhere and destroy the currency, you can't do that anymore. And for the whole world to see in a blockchain, so you have immutability, you have commodities. To me, it's a system that will be backed by commodities. And it's not just gold. It could be silver, it could be copper, it could be anything, farmland, anything that you consider important in a world of commodities, natural gas, oil, anything. And I think that would be, so in other words, I think broad diversification is dangerous, right? I think sampling of asset classes that don't move in harmony, except this time in the case of rising interest rates, they all get crushed. But I think the way to do this is to identify the primary trend. And if the primary trend is of increasing of commodities, then you take a very big position within it and broadly diversify within that sector. Uranium, gold, silver, platinum, copper, take your pick, natural gas, oil, all of those things will give you a broadly diversified, even agricultural ETFs or farmland, that gives you a broadly diversified representation of the primary trend. You don't become average by being broadly diversified. You become successful by identifying the primary trend and broadly diversifying within it. And that's how you win, in my opinion.
I have another question about how to play what's going on right now. And maybe this is a silly question, but I'm going to go for it anyway. So the BRICS, they're growing in prominence. They're adding members. Is that an investable trend in some way?
Well, it's interesting. They just issued a lot sooner than I thought they would. Something I think they're called the Maharaja. I can't pronounce it, and I forget the name. It's some Majahara, something in that name. They're BRICS bonds, and there's about $40 billion worth of BRICS bonds that are being issued right now, only to be bought in local currencies, so you can't buy them with U.S. dollars. I think the only way that you are able to benefit from this growing trend would be to invest in the things that they seem to be interested in, such as natural resources, rare earth metals, precious metals, oil and gas, the things that they are accumulating that we don't talk about in the West. That's what I mean by the West doesn't prioritize what the rest of the world does. So instead of being able to invest in their BRICS bonds, which would be a direct, or I suppose you could buy yuan or whatever, but I think the way to do it is instead invest in what they are prioritizing as important. And when you realize that they control, the majority of human population or represent the majority of human population, that's a bet that I would be willing to take.
Right. So it all comes full circle. We're watching what they do, and then we should follow that.
Right.
Okay. One.
Maharaja. That's
okay.
Thanks.
One last question before I let you go. So obviously you have a bullish outlook on gold, and you have a very good eye on what's going on in the gold market, the buying trends, what people are doing. So a lot of people are curious. We've been talking about a lot of long-term trends. In the short term, how do you see gold performing in 2024?
Look, anyone who answers that question with a concrete answer is guessing. But what I will say to you is this: it's now January. In October, you have the BRICS meeting where they are going to announce which countries have been admitted, and maybe even a commonly backed currency, which is 1 month before the election that will reshape the world. And I would say to you, the likelihood of seeing something happen with gold grows by the day as we get closer to these two very, very landmark pivotal decisions and meetings and outcomes. So, look, since 2000, which is 25 years ago, 24 years ago, gold has outpaced the S&P and it's outpaced the bond market. And you see the countries that used to accumulate our debt as an asset, which has a very short, limited time frame in historical sense of accepting a country's debt as wealth, as an asset. You look at China, they're shedding their bonds. They own the least amount they have in 15 years. Saudi Arabia, Russia, India, they're all shedding bonds and doing what? Buying record amount of gold. Gold has appreciated by 7.8% per year since 2000. That's better than the S&P and obliterated the bond market and has no counterparty liability. So the world is saying, what do we need treasuries for that have default risk, inflation risk, and interest rate risk? We can just buy gold and get rid of and kill two birds with one stone because they want to break free from the Western hegemony. It's not just the dollar, which has the supreme settlements, to Brett Johnson's point. It is still the supreme settlement currency for now. But what they can really affect is the reserve status of the dollar by shedding bonds and replacing it with gold, which has a much longer history in terms of it being wealth. And if you go back for the last century, for the last 25 years, it's outperformed the bond market handily and the stock market. So it acts the same way. And when you see the central banks, which are the most well-informed traders on the globe, not just the wealthiest, most well-informed, something tells me that gold will do very well when the switch is flipped. But Charlotte, I think it happens on a Monday morning, and a little by little, well, that's what people should be paying attention to. Only thing is the Western media, except people like you and me, are saying it, but we're not on the Western media on Fox News and CNBC every night saying this. We're saying it to the people who are watching and are listening. So we get it, you get it, but the point of it is that we'll wake up on a Monday morning and it will all change. I'll give you one more example of what I mean by that. If you look at what's happened over the last several months in Shanghai, which the Shanghai Gold Exchange has become incredibly prominent, and it's in many ways does more volume than the COMEX does in terms of deliveries and everything. The last day of the year, I'll use it as an example, December 27th or whatnot of 2023, in Shanghai, the price of silver was $26.25. It was $24 or thereabouts on COMEX and the LBMA. They are slowly turning up the heat. It was 10% higher it is now in Shanghai than it is in London in the US. And gold has been between $60 and $160 higher in Shanghai than it is here. Slowly turning up the heat because anyone who has access to those markets, these big traders who could care less about nationalism and only about profit, will take every ounce they can get in London and in Chicago and settle it and deliver it in Shanghai for a huge arbitrage spread, slowly turning up the heat. So I will simply say this to you, little by little by little by little, logarithmic decay, and wake up and bang, it'll be so high because the Western market, which is massively rehypothecated, meaning they sell the same contract over and over and over and over again. In silver, it's 1,500% rehypothecated right now in the registered category. The bar is available for delivery. 15 people own the same contract. 1 out of 15 would get delivery. The whole system breaks. Point of it is we will wake up one morning and no one will trust the Western market anymore. And you'll see the price setting mechanism move to Shanghai or to Moscow or Dubai, the countries that have been buying and accumulating and valuing it for a long time. So does it happen this year? Maybe. We're on borrowed time, if you ask me. And look, I know the new version of The Little Boy Who Cried Wolf. There I am on the cover. But the wolf comes in the last page. And the wolf's coming. Is it October, November? Is it later? Is it before? I don't know. And I think instead I'd rather be 6 months or 6 years early than 60 seconds late. And that's the honest to God truth.
Okay, I think, as always, great insights. I'm going to have to go back and watch this a couple of times so I can take it all in. That's where we'll leave it today. I'd love to have you back to talk about election.
Anytime.
That'll be an
You know that,
interesting
Cheryl. You call anytime and I'm happy to jump on.
Oh, of course. Well, thank you so much for today. And once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and this is Andy Schectman.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a comment below. We'll see you next time.